come because it's icy out there. Okay, some little things. Michael Ehrman, our chairperson, could not be here again. He is out of town. He does wish everybody a wonderful new year, and we have a fabulous program coming up. I'm Pat Hughes. I do the website. I send out some of the emails. If you are not on our email list, please sign up in the back so that we can give you reminders. And next month, instead of Betty Conley doing her thing, we are going to have, we had a speaker that asked, I love when people ask to speak to our group. We're getting so good. We have the story of historical preservation in Pittsburgh, and this is Louise Sturgis, the Executive Director of the Pittsburgh History and Landmarks, who will be talking to us in February. In March, we have a repeat, Quentin Sprayback, who is a professor at the University of Findlay in Ohio, is going to come and talk to us about a book he's written, Westinghouse, A Gentle Genius. And he has been here before, and he's a very good speaker. In April, we are going to have, as a matter of fact, a neighbor of mine, Jim Rich, who was former president of the Squirrel Hill Merchants Association, and he's going to talk about Squirrel Hill retailing, 1966 to present. So that should be interesting. And then we have another repeat after that. Elizabeth Rourke, a professor at the university, Chatham University, will be here to talk about the history of Pittsburgh in prints and photography, 1800 to 1900. So that should be interesting. And Betty Conley is going to handle our June program. So I think she wants to say a few things about her June program.
I'll just say greetings, nice to see you all. And just a very quick word about the June program. We want to create our own version of oral history. We've done some in the past. People bring their memories, they bring their collections, and our topic is going to be, here's the school I went to in Squirrel Hill. And if you were a native, or if you sent children to schools in Squirrel Hill, then you have a reason to come and listen. Who knows, you might find out things about your school that you never knew. So I encourage you to come, and I said bring your mementos. We will have a videographer back there, and she can take pictures of your mementos and she'll tell her what they are. Bring your high school yearbook, bring your athletic sweater with a big S on it, if you have that in high school. Anything like that that you might have, bring it. People will have real enjoyment in seeing it. So take part, be active. And also in June, we're going to have that walking tour.
Yes, we have a walking tour scheduled. We don't have the date yet scheduled, but that'll also be at Chatham University. So we will be planning that one also.
That's one of the most historical spots condensed in, what, 14 acres?
Right.
In one spot, so even if your legs aren't so good, well, I don't know if Marion does it. I don't know if she'll go all the way up the hill.
No, I don't think Marion is doing it. I think we have someone from Chatham who's actually going to be doing the program. So
Maybe we should start at the top of the hill.
Yes, they go downward and they get a bus back.
And anyways, good things coming up. Be part of the Historical Society this year and have a good time.
Right. Thank you. So we're looking forward to all of these wonderful things. And at any time, we're always welcome to have ideas of who you would like to have come and speak to us. If there are people you have heard before or somebody you have missed that are over the years, please feel free. We're always glad to get ideas, and we're also always looking for photographs. We have an archive, so we're developing photographs of Squirrel Hill, and we don't necessarily need to have them permanently. We can take them and scan them in the computer. Just if you have photographs, it would be wonderful to add them to our archive. So before we get started with our Assistant Chief of Operations of the Pittsburgh Fire Department, I would like to personally say that I have had in the last month 2 occasions to see directly the fire department, one of which, of course, we saw the fire that was down on Murray Avenue. And our walking group happened to be walking down Forward Avenue at 7:30 in the morning that morning and saw everything that was going on. It was quite impressive of that group. The other thing is that in the middle of the night, one night, my husband collapsed and I had to call 911, and the number 18 fire engine group came, and it was remarkable. They came in less than 2 minutes. Not enough time for me to get out of my ratty old nightgown, which I now determined that my New Year's resolution was to get rid of it. And everything is fine with him, but I was so impressed at how quickly they got there and how wonderfully they handled everything. So on that note, we will have our speaker, who is Francis Kip Deleonibus.
There you go.
Close. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that the firefighters helped.
Yes, wonderful.
Well, good evening. Patty mentioned Michael Ehrman, and this meeting between us has extended over a year or so. And let me give you the history behind that. As you know, I think in the late summer of the year, there's a special night called National Night Out. And I think it started with as an anti-crime movement, but it really has developed into neighborhood celebrations and recognition. And we participate in that, the Fire Bureau participates in that very, very much. And I want to say two years ago, I was out and about the city on that night, and as I told Patty, my wife and I, we live down Forbes Avenue, down on East End Avenue in Regent Square, and I sort of finished up in coming this way in Squirrel Hill so I could end the night and just go home. And I want to say the Northumberland or Aylesboro, I can't remember the street I was on, but I stopped at this neighborhood park, group, and Michael came out and introduced himself, and we got into a nice conversation, and he said, "Hey, did you ever hear of the Squirrel Hill Historical Society?" And I said, "No." I said, "Actually, history was not my thing in school, but I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, we're looking for someone that can talk about the fire department. Do you know anybody?" And I said, "Well, I guess it's me." So I kind of volunteered myself, but we actually scheduled this for last January or somewhere around there, December, January, February, but I got really sick and I had to cancel, and it took a whole year. So you really have a lot of speakers lined up. It's hard to get a spot, so I had to wait a whole year to get here. But I'm really happy to get here and speak to you tonight. And I have no agenda. I guess I'm going to wing it, and I could talk forever about the fire department, especially here in Pittsburgh, because it's my passion. But I brought some things along. I have some handouts for you, and I made a CD of some historical data and photographs that I'll give to the society. I don't know if you take those kinds of things. And the leftover papers I have, you can have and pass out to other folks. But let me tell you a little bit about myself. I wanted to be a firefighter ever since I was a little kid, and I don't know how many kids I lifted onto the fire truck over the years, but I was one of those little kids. My father was a volunteer firefighter in a borough east of here called Monroeville. And my family's actually from Brushton, Humboldt Brushton, and we moved out. And he became active in the fire department there. Took me to the fire station when I was a little kid, and I loved it. So I knew that's what I always wanted to do, but I didn't know how I was going to do it as to get paid to do it. I did it for free, but as a career, I really wanted it to be a career. So after I finished school, I moved back to Pittsburgh, and I applied, and I was hired in 1973. So in May, I'm going to complete my 36th year with the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire. So I started out as a firefighter in East Liberty, and then I was promoted to lieutenant in 1978, and I worked on Levington Avenue. And then I was promoted to captain in 1980, and I worked in 10 or 12 different fire stations all over the city. North side, never worked in the south side, but I worked in the north side, the east, mostly East End. And never really worked here in Squirrel Hill. I used to get detailed up here. I used to get sent whenever someone's short, if they were short a crew, somebody was off on vacation or something, I could set up. But in 2003, I left the suppression company. I left the engine company as a captain, and I went to arson investigations. And that was a kind of a 5-day-a-week job. It was totally different from the shift work I had done for all those years. But I investigated fires, which I found really fascinating. So it really rekindled some interest in my desire to learn new things. So because of learning fire investigation, the law, how it pertained to children, how it pertained to adults, and what we can do, how we eliminated causes to find fires or figure out how fires started, I really got interested in learning. So that led to me completing my bachelor's degree in 2007. And just this past year, I completed my master's degree in a program called Executive Fire Service Leadership. Now that sounds very fancy and all that, but in 2005, I was promoted to my present position, which is Assistant Fire Chief. So I'm actually second in command of the entire fire department, and I oversee the operations, as you said. And that includes the day-to-day operations of EMS delivery that we give our first responder work, of course our fires, all the runs, all the fire trucks you see on the street. I work with committees of firefighters to write the specifications, to make the purchases, to make sure that I spend all the tax dollars wisely and get the most out of them. I work with the maintenance program to keep those fire trucks on the road. I work with the people that buy new hose, new air packs, God bless you. All of the equipment that we use, I'm directly involved with. So that's me in a nutshell. But let me start with one of my undergraduate classes was called Exploring Place History. It was Exploring Place and history. I had to take this class, but I had no idea what this class was about. So I thought, I read the abstract and the introduction to the class, and I thought, well, a place, that's easy. I'm going to choose Pittsburgh. This is my home. It took me 6 weeks in this 15-week course to understand what the course was about. And it wasn't that, place like, well, this is the place for this chair, or, Pat and I live down the street in that house, that's our place. That wasn't it at all. Place was a concept. It was an idea. It was a culture. It was many, many things. So I had to read and research about authors and people from the past and what they wrote about their areas or their place. So I had to try to adapt that to Pittsburgh. And then I was required to write 2 papers. And actually, I brought those with me. They're rough drafts, so you'll see notes and things in them, but I made copies for everybody. You can take them with you and read them. One is on the history of Pittsburgh itself, and and the resources in the back that I used. And the second one is on the history of the Pittsburgh Fire Department. And so I brought that with me, but going back, Pittsburgh, and I'm going to read a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit, and hopefully I won't bore you, and just please ask a question anytime. I think I want to move on this way, and hopefully I don't bore anybody. But, as you can probably imagine, the fire department in Pittsburgh, way back, was volunteer. And what I found out was, it was actually something called a public fire department. And the public fire department gave way to a volunteer service. And if you took a hard look at the list of the early volunteers, it usually encompassed the leading members of the community. But it was mostly men. And there were no women back then. But we have a centennial book, which I can leave up here. I have up here that I'll refer to. This is a historical book that was put out, I got it in 1973 when I started, but I think it was put out in 1970. It's the history of the fire department from 1870 to 1970. And there's a lot of history in it, which I used for my paper. And a lot I'll refer to. I have a few pictures and some things I want to talk to you about. But in that centennial book, it says that the first organized volunteer fire company for which factual data can be found was the Eagle Fire Engine and Hose Company located at First Avenue in Chancery Lane, downtown. Now, I don't know where Chancery Lane is.
I've heard it.
Have you?
I've seen it, yeah.
Have you? Okay. Now, I know where First Avenue is.
Near the
obviously.
public safety building.
Well, I was going to say, where I work now is at Second and Ross, which is right across from the new PNC.
Mhm.
Okay. So it was there. And that company was organized in 1794. Yeah. There were no fire hydrants. And there was hose, I guess, but my research showed there were no hose couplings. So I don't know how good that would be. How would you put it together to use it? But that was because every citizen was required to keep 2 or 3 heavy leather buckets with their family name on it. Okay? And then it had to be painted on there, and then when there was a fire, everybody had to grab their bucket and go to the fire and use the water on the fire. So 2 lines of men and women, I guess they used women then for this, were formed from a water supply, wherever they got the water supply, to the fire. And it was the bucket brigade. They passed the buckets along the room and, and continued that way. So, that's the first concept of place. The city of Pittsburgh, but now the Pittsburgh Fire Department became place. That's how I related this to my paper. So that was the first defense that we had against the ravages of fire within our city. And keeping in mind that our city is divided geographically by the 3 rivers, which is still a challenge today for us to cross bridges and climb hills, it led to problems gaining access to certain areas. And we still have that issue with heavy fire trucks today and bridges that have certain weight limits, and we have to be careful with that. Tiny, tiny streets and lots of cars and big cars parked everywhere, so it's difficult to get around. But that's the earliest documentation that we have of the fire department. So, let me move on. Then in 1869, so that is somewhat, some 1794, to 1869, some 70 years later, we finally formed a paid fire department. There were 22 square miles then. The city was only 22 square miles. Today, do you know how many square miles we are today? 54, 55, right around in there. We have 88 neighborhoods and 55 square miles, that's right. So we've obviously gained a lot of real estate since then. So because manufacturing was coming up, business was coming up, that's why the people then said, hey, we can't continue to run the volunteer fire department. Pittsburgh was growing. So on March 23rd, 1870, it varies from 1869 to 1870, but somewhere around there, 1870, our governor at the time was named John Geary, and he introduced and approved a legislation act to establish the Pittsburgh Fire Department. He signed it, and that empowered our city council to establish, organize, and control the city fire department and provide for the expenses. So our centennial book here says that on April 14th, 1870, council so acted and the fire department became a reality. When the act to create the fire department was established, a new place-based part of history was formed. So we moved from the public fire department to the volunteer fire department to the paid fire department. So that's our place, as if you were studying in history that I had to do in this college class. But it's kind of interesting. As I said, I was never interested in history, but boy, when I had to work on this class, I became interested, so I share your passion. So no longer did we have volunteer firefighters. We had firefighters that worked and got a paycheck for the work they did. The leaders then saw the necessity of a fast-growing city and wanted to protect the citizens in the best manner possible. And in an effort to better serve the people of Pittsburgh, and by an act of the Pennsylvania Assembly, in 1888, the Public Safety Department was formed. Now I find that amazing. 1888. We still operate under that system today. And maybe you're not aware, but if you pay attention, in Pittsburgh, we have the Bureau of Fire, we have the Bureau of Police, and we have the Bureau of EMS, we have the Bureau of Building Inspection. That's all under the umbrella of the Department of Public Safety. Other cities, and I've traveled across the country doing seminars and interviews and different things like that, not everybody's under that system. So we have a public safety director who then sets policy, so to speak, for the entire public safety department. Now each of us are a bureau under that. So that's why we are called the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire. And a lot of people don't understand that are not under that system. But I found that that's pretty interesting because 1888, it's a long time ago, but we're still under that same system. And then, as time moved on a little bit later, in 1896, there was a headline that appeared in the newspaper at that time. I guess the newspaper was called the Pittsburgh Dispatch. I don't know if anybody has heard of that. Was the headline, "Fighters of Fire on the City, Fighters of Fire and the City's Needs." So there was an article that likened or compared the life of city firefighters to those in the military, soldiers and sailors. They had the same kind of dangerous fascination, some people say, the same kind of challenge, the same kind of cautions they had to take, and ultimately they died trying to do their job. And that is, that happens to the military, that happens to firefighters, and I can speak a little bit about that. I do have an interesting article that I want to read and pass out to you also about a firefighter that lost his life back in 1790 or 1890, I think. I have it here. But this article described the life of a career firefighter, that of soldiers and sailors. And our centennial book says, "The life of a fireman, like a soldier and sailor, has a dangerous fascination that frequently leads to the untimely grave of the hero. The three are in constant warfare with death, and too often the latter triumph, snuffing out the lies full of tenacity, courage, noble qualities in a man." And today, women, because we do have both. In 1896, the fire chief's name, I don't know his first name, his last name was Humphreys. And he was known as a forward thinker, and he wanted to begin to look out for the lives of the firefighters, and he wanted to improve the equipment they were using. And I guess you can imagine, at least I can imagine back then, they had absolutely nothing to protect them. Maybe a helmet or a coat of some sort, but nothing like we have today. So he wanted to upgrade the department and make improvements to firefighting to reduce the death of firefighters. So I guess it makes me think that they must have lost a lot of firefighters back then, not only because of maybe just the ravages of fire, but the exposures that the firefighters were subjected to, and they didn't have the proper equipment to protect them. So Chief Humphreys, decided that he was going to buy a new, what he called a respirator, for the firefighters to use so that they could breathe while they were in the conditions of smoke. And I want to fast forward that all the way to the year 2006. We study something called line of duty deaths, and we make an acronym, LODD, line of duty deaths. And in 2006, the line of duty deaths were very high. In 2004, for instance, the United States lost 107 firefighters in the line of duty. So going back to Chief Humphreys, back in 1896, he had a vision. He knew that it was dangerous and he wanted to do something to help the firefighters. Unfortunately, in 2004, Pennsylvania lost 13 firefighters in the line of duty. Now, 2 of those firefighters were from Pittsburgh. If you remember the Ebenezer Church fire in the Hill District, the tower collapsed and we lost 2 firefighters. Okay. Let me read to you. Actually, I'm going to pass out. Let me keep the spot on. I have a story about a firefighter named, thank you, Joseph Elmer Figley. And the date is December, I have plenty, so you want to pass those through, and any extras we'll just bring back up. But Joseph Elmer Figley was a firefighter that died in the line of duty back in 1890. Let me just read through this. The term fire load is not recognized by the construction industry. It's purely a fire engineering term. A heavy content fire load is the storing of combustible products closely together in large piles. In a commercial building or warehouse type facility, it is a critical hazard for firefighters. In a large open floor plan of a warehouse, the combination of a heavy fire load, plenty of oxygen, heat, an ignition source, or a chemical reaction that can cause a fire that will rapidly develop. It will quickly consume the contents of an entire floor and begin to move upward and laterally, searching for more fuel. Now that paragraph sort of describes the way things were back in the late 1800s. When we didn't have fire codes, when we didn't have laws and regulations that mandated shop owners or building owners or manufacturing and to limit and safely produce what they were doing so that we didn't have the consequences of what this story is about. But this goes on to say that Joseph Elmer Figley was born in the Pittsburgh suburb of Baldwin in 1863. He was the 3rd child and the 2nd son of William and Elizabeth Figley. After completing his formal education, he worked as a laborer until he joined the Pittsburgh Fire Department in 1886 at the age of 23. I started when I was 21, so I kind of know what he feels like. He was assigned to Engine Company 13 in Hazelwood, which then was a single engine company. Now, interesting about that, our company in Hazelwood is still called Engine 13. Yeah, but we also have a ladder truck there. So we have an engine and a ladder truck, but that number never changed.
We changed a lot of those numbers.
Yeah, we did in the 80s. We changed up, but 13 was one that wasn't changed.
But the old buildings still have
Yes.
the original number on them.
Like 18 up here was 34. You know, and in fact, well, I'll just see this while I get talking, I get off track. But this fire station, we just celebrated the 100th anniversary of it. It was 100 years old. I'll say 2 years ago, something like that. So that's pretty neat. It's not the oldest. We have one on the north side that's just a few years older. But anyway, Mr. Figley, he went to 13. So it goes on to say he was a good-natured fellow, intelligent, and quick to learn. At Engine 13, he did something that is still important today. He fit in with the established crew, added to the efficiency of the unit, and became an integral part of the team. That is so important. because we do work as a team. You know, just like the military, just like the soldiers, and just like the sailors. When you see our fire truck go by, you see 4 people. We're never less than 4 people. That's a team. The safety and officers of number 13 admired Figley for his cheerful demeanor and respected him for the performance of his duty and his work ethic. He was known to them as Elmer, which was his middle name. In 1888, while still assigned to number 13, Figley married his sweetheart, Eliza Gallagher, and the young couple took up residence at 5122 2nd Avenue in Hazelwood. So he moved not too far away from the fire station. Figley was a very loving and devoted husband. He was so in love with his wife that his buddies would often tease him about it. At age 23, Eliza was a beautiful young woman who was totally committed to and completely in love with her brave Pittsburgh fireman. She would often visit her husband at the fire station, bringing him smiles and laughter, to all the while filling the place with an enchantment that only a woman can bring. And you can just imagine going into I don't know if you ever walked into a fire station with a bunch of guys. Those are true words. In 1889, much to the disappointment of the members of 13, Figley was promoted to lieutenant and transferred to Engine Company 11, located at 9th and Bingham in the Pittsburgh South Side. Now, that building is still there. Pat and I were my wife, we were just talking. Our son went to both of our sons went to Alderdice, but our younger one played football, and they play all their City League games there at the, they call it Couples Field now. What do they call it back then?
South Stadium.
South Stadium. Well, that's at 9th in Carson. Well, when you walk down 9th to Bingham, that building's still there. It still says Engine Company 11. And I find that really kind of neat because the last engine company I served was Engine Company 11, but it wasn't there. It was over on Millville Avenue. It was one that was closed. It moved from Shadyside. Well, the building is still in Shadyside at Elmer and Filbert. That's called 28. That's now the headquarters for EMS. But when that, back in 76, I believe it was, the station was built on Millville. They moved there and a renumbering happened and that was called 11. And that was the last place I worked as a captain. And before I went to arson investigations. But anyway, that's the original location of station number 11. But anyhow, so we read that Figley went there. Now, back in those days, it says promotions were achieved through merit, nepotism, or through friendship. So I guess what they're trying to say, maybe merit didn't play so much a part in your promotion, but maybe nepotism or who you knew or whatever did. So anyway, for Joe Figley, it was a recommendation from the officers who had helped train him. They recognized his leadership potential, and after only 3 years on the job, at age 26, he was rewarded for it. So, Lieutenant Figley then moved to the station on the south side. It was now in charge. So, our story goes on to say at 12:30 on the morning of December 5th, 1890, Samuel Siebert, who lived at a residence on Exchange Alley, 1 block behind Liberty, which I do believe that's still there, Exchange Way, yeah, which is known as Liberty Avenue, was awakened by a man outside his residence, banging on the doors and shouting, "Fire!" Siebert ran outside and noticed flames coming from the rear of the 2nd floor of the 6-story McGuinn building, located in the 900 block of Liberty Avenue. The alley was illuminated by the fire and heavy smoke was finding its way towards Siebert's home. Box 32 was activated and the first alarm units were on their way as the fire burned its way into the 3rd and 4th floor of the McGuinn building. First arriving units found 4 stories of the McGuinn building in flames, with the fire spreading into the 3-story Harris building on the right and into the 6-story Stewart building on the left. Man, I hate when that happens. when it leaves the building that's on fire and goes next door, that's not a good thing. as the first alarm units began putting water on the fire from Liberty Street, they called it then, and raising ground ladders, Chief Brown put in the second and third alarms. Now, we still use the alarm system. A second alarm is a request for more help. So other engines and ladder trucks from around the city that are close by, they now come and they help extinguish the fire. We still use that today. The McGuinn Cracker and Confectionery Company had 4 floors heavily stocked with products to be sold over the Christmas holiday. So think back to that first paragraph I read to you about what's called fire load. Thousands of boxes of paper products, towels, napkins, tablecloths, cookies, and crackers were all stocked in neat rows for easy access. The R&W Jenkinson Tobacco Company occupied the top 2 floors of the McGuinn building, and the company had $60,000 worth of tobacco products stored on the premises. So just imagine, we have all these combustible or flammable products, paper and flour and all these things, plus tobacco. So in today's market, it says the equivalent equals about $1.28 million worth of tobacco products. So I would assume that that's a lot. The 3-story Harris building was occupied by the L.H. Harris Drug Company. In addition to the potions and concoctions of the day, I like that, potions and concoctions of the day, they had stored 20 barrels of whiskey, 20 barrels of benzene, plus a stock of fireworks and explosives on the premises. Now today, boy, if I would find that, I'd shut them down in an instant. Yeah, obviously, with codes and things today, those kinds of products would not be together. We have sprinkler systems today. We have automatic fire systems today. So think about the fire load and the combustibles that these guys face, especially at this fire. So as the units were able to, from Liberty, were able to put water onto this fire, it was not enough. By the time the second and third alarm companies arrived, the whole block of Liberty Street from 9th to Garrison Way was burning. First Assistant Chief John Steele had arrived on the scene and had taken command. Third Assistant Chief James Stewart responded from the south side and was ordered to get water on the buildings from the rear along Exchange Alley. He took engines 7, 10, and 11 with him. They established a water supply and moved their horse teams to a secure location and began to battle the flames. So here we are with the horse-drawn fire engines back then, steamers. You know, they had to be hooked up in the fire station to keep the steam going so that they could work the pump and pump the water. So Lieutenant Figley and his crew were set up behind the Harris building in the tight alley near the residence of Samuel Siebert. Now remember, he's the guy that originally saw the fire. As they focused their hose stream on the Harris building, some of the stock of the fireworks began to explode, and colorful flares began rocketing out of the flames. The firemen held their positions as the fireworks showered down on them, around them. Mr. Siebert had had enough of the heat and smoke that he was ready to leave, and he was in the process of leaving his residence when that fireworks show began. So the fireworks served to hasten his departure, but when leaving, he stopped to warn the firemen about the explosives in the Harris building. They acknowledged him, but kept on about their business of fighting the fire, thinking that he was referring to the fireworks, which was what he saw. So, working with Lieutenant Figley was his firefighter George Lang on a hose line. And as they worked the stream of water from the line into the building, there was a blast from the fireworks and a shower of projectiles, and large pieces of glass rained down upon the two of them. They held together with no chance to run. When the rain of glass had subsided, Lieutenant Figley held his hand up for Lang to see the blood running from a gash where he had been struck from the glass. A moment later, there was a loud and powerful explosion, that blew out the rear of the third floor of the Harris building. Firemen barely had time to react when the entire rear of the Harris building suddenly collapsed. Then, like dominoes, the rear wall of all 6 stories of the McGuinn building began to lean and then collapsed with a roar. Firemen on the ground ran in all directions trying to escape. Figley and Lang had dropped their hose line when the explosion occurred and ran toward Garrison Way to safety. But Lieutenant Figley stopped short and looked back toward his hose line. Other firemen later speculated that he stopped to check the nozzle. Shutoffs at the nozzle had only recently been invented and put into service in the Pittsburgh Fire Department. A shutoff is actually a lever that we have that we can turn the water off on the nozzle. So back then, what they're describing is just basically a pipe that would narrow down to a certain size tip that would squirt the water. I always, when I teach, I try to explain to firefighters, if you take a garden hose without your nozzle on it and you run it, the water, depending on your water pressure, and where we live, we don't have great water pressure, but the water will just come out. But if you put your thumb over it and make that opening smaller, there's pressure in there and it squirts, correct? So back then they had basically nozzles that fastened to the end of the hose, and the end of that nozzle was smaller, so it created some pressure to squirt. The only way they had to shut it off was back at the valve on the engine itself, and the shut off. So apparently this was something new to them. They actually had a shut off on the nozzle. So firemen have always been trained to never release a flowing hose line. We still teach them that because it whips around like a snake and it's out of control. Doing so would let the pressurized hose fly around like a large serpent that could hit and seriously injure or kill another firefighter. So Lieutenant Figley was worried about that hose line and the other firefighters. If he let it go and the water was running, he was worried about it whipping around and hurting somebody while the building was coming down. So, for just those few seconds of delay, that left Figley trapped in a collapse zone. When the rear of the wall of the Harris building fell, it had completely buried him and partially buried several other firemen. Those who were injured and trapped in the debris were calling for help with the fear of being buried alive or burned to death present in their anguished calls. Firemen already on the scene rushed to their aid and swiftly began digging them out. These brave men put their own lives at risk to rescue their fallen comrades. Smoke and dust had obstructed the collapse, and the fire was still raging while the firemen worked to recover their fallen brothers. They choked on the smoke while digging furiously into the smoldering pile of debris. Adolf Roth, the driver of number 7, was pounded by falling bricks and suffered 2 broken legs, and his right arm was broken in 2 places. August Winter, also of number 7, was struck down with Roth and then suffered bad bruising. Edward Adolf and John Allen of number 10 were both hit. Adolf suffered a compound fracture of his arm, and Allen suffered a broken arm. Both were also badly bruised. John Lempies of number 10 suffered a gash on his head. Chief Evans was knocked down and partially buried in the rubble. He suffered 2 broken ribs and bad bruises. John Shepard of number 11 suffered a gash on his head. His arm was broken in 2 places, and he was burned while buried in the debris. It took them 2 hours of hard labor before they found Lieutenant Figley. Progress was agonizingly slow, digging by hand through the huge pile of brick, heavy timbers, boards, and plaster. The fire had been put out by then, and they continued to work under the threat of a secondary collapse. They found him lying face down, and as they worked to free him from the pile of smoking rubble, they saw one eye of their friend open and thought just for a moment that he might still be alive. They soon learned otherwise. The life had been crushed out of his broken body. They rolled him onto a stretcher, but before they covered him, George Lang, who had labored furiously to find his friend, reached down with a dirty hand and closed Figley's eye, and then wiped the tears away from his own. The hose line was found just beyond the reach of Figley's outstretched arm. It had been shut off. Now, his wife, Eliza Figley, was preparing breakfast, waiting for her husband to come home, when sullen-faced representatives of the fire department showed up instead. The tragic news overwhelmed the young woman, and she was unable to handle her grief. Fits of sobbing and denial of her beloved's death left her in shock and bedridden for 2 days. Firefighter Joseph Figley was survived by his parents, Wayne, 65, and Elizabeth, 55, an older brother, Brian, 32, and a sister, Anna, 31. 2 younger sisters, Ida, 25, and Sarah, 21. So he came from a big family. And his little brother, Allenson, who was 17. His heartbroken wife, Eliza, suffered grief beyond misery. The firefighters' disability fund, administered by the mayor and city council, issued Eliza a $1,000 check as compensation for the death of her husband. A sum that today is worth about $20,000. So we're not gaining too much ground here. Widowed at the young age of 25, Eliza, it says Eliza never remarried. So, and what it goes on to say about his funeral service and where he was laid out. And then the final line there says, Elmer Figley was the 8th Pittsburgh firefighter to die in the line of duty. Now, that's just a story, and that story is shockingly similar to the tragedy we had in 2004. The Ebenezer Church fire, when the tower collapsed, it buried 2 firefighters. I was there. I watched it. The chief was hurt, just like the chief was hurt in this fire. He was struck by the falling debris and had to leave the scene. It was chaos. We dug with our hands too to uncover the firefighters and found them face down just like that. The only difference is I have now been in the position to have to go to the house and tell the widows. And I just did that recently with another firefighter that we lost last year, who died while he was on duty in the fire station. So I just bring that, I wanted to read that story to you because it's very similar to what just happened a few years ago. And some things change, but some things never change. We still have the same passion, we still have the same desire to do our job. But I have to tell you, we take more steps today to be a little bit more precautionary. We study building construction more, we certainly have more fire codes, and we do more things today to protect the firefighters than they ever thought about doing back in those years. A little timeline about the Bureau of Fire. Let me read this, not very long. I'll read that to you, and then I kind of have some things broken down by decades, how we grew over in history. In 1793, so we go back even further than some of the stuff that I've already told you. The citizen volunteers who regularly manned the bucket brigade lines formed a social club called the Pittsburgh Fire Company. I don't know where they met or what they did, but that's what we read. Then in 1794, the following year, the club became the Eagle Fire Company, precursor to the Eagle Fire Engine and Hose Company. The company's first firefighting engine, bought in Philadelphia, arrived in Pittsburgh on a wagon. So I guess in 1794, we got our first fire engine. In 1802, the second volunteer fire company, Allegheny Engine and Hose Company, was chartered. So we went from about 9 years with only one fire truck, one fire company, and then we got a second. 9 years later, in 1811, the third company was formed, and its name was called Vigilant, V-I-L-I-G-A-N-T. In 1815, 1 year before the borough was incorporated as a city, the Neptune Company was formed. I wonder where they got those names. I never looked into that, but I do know this. At one point in time, if you didn't have, you had to have fire insurance on your building for the fire department to come and extinguish your fire. And when you bought fire insurance, did you ever see the fire marks? It's a symbol.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that had to be shown on outside of your home. Can you imagine? Or you call the fire department, you had a fire, here comes the fire department, but they look and said, oh, let me see your fire mark. No fire mark, oh, I'm sorry, we can't help you, drive away. But that's the way it was. It's crazy, but that's the way it was. You imagine us doing that today. Oh. Yeah.
I think that it actually started over in England because the first fire companies over there were organized by fire insurance companies sort of as a way of cutting their losses, and the general assumption was, okay, if you're not protected by our company, we don't have to pay you anyway. Why should we waste our time?
Yeah. Yeah, totally true. Then in 1820, history tells us that a gal named Marina Betts became Pittsburgh's first female firefighter as she worked alongside the men on bucket brigades. She was known at times to dump buckets of water on men who refused to help douse the fires. So she didn't take any guff from the firefighters back then. In 1838, a company called Niagara was the last of Pittsburgh's famous 5 volunteer fire companies was chartered. So by 1838, we had 5 volunteer fire departments chartered. In 1845, Pittsburgh's Great Fire started at the intersection of Ferry and 2nd Streets when a washwoman's kettle fire ignited grass, spread to an ice house, and raged throughout the city. I think actually it's kind of, I'm sorry, my cover's kind of, did anybody have this? Yeah. Yeah. There's 2 of these. Isn't there a second one?
I think there's been like 3 or 4.
Maybe more, okay. I believe this is the first one. This fire, this great fire was mentioned in this book here by Stephen Loren. Apparently this blaze happened on April 10th, 1845, and it wiped out a third of the city, destroyed 982 buildings. That's hard to believe. 982 buildings, and caused $8 million damage, and left 12,000 people homeless. Imagine, $8 million back in 1845. So in 1861, a stray bulldog named Dog Jack became the mascot of the Niagara Volunteer Fire Engine House on Penn Avenue. When the members enlisted in the 102nd Regiment of the Pennsylvania Volunteers, the Washington Infantry, during the Civil War, Jack went along and remained with the regiment during his battles. Twice captured, he was exchanged for Confederate soldiers and released from prison. Yeah. He was wounded twice and recovered, but disappeared on December 23rd, 1864. So, poor Dog Jack, he had kind of a tough life, I guess. In 1870, I guess that's the year that I said earlier, that's when the paid, 1869, 1870, is when the paid fire department was formed. The annual salaries back then were $1,200 for the chief engineer, $840 for the assistant chief engineer, $840 for the foreman, $820 for steam engine engineers, and $750 for engineer drivers, and $720 for all other firemen. So they had a lot of classes of jobs back then, which paid a little bit different wages, I suppose. In 1877, the railroaders went on strike. And there was a riot against the Pennsylvania militia. Violent crowds burned 1,200 freight cars, 104 engines, 48 passenger cars, and 39 company buildings, including the Union Depot and Hotel. And I think in our centennial book there are pictures about that, and I'll pass that around in a minute. In 1901, a gigantic fire that started at the Western Pennsylvania Exposition Building burned a number of exhibit buildings, consumed nearly 20 nearby homes, and claimed the life of one firefighter. In 1903, the City Firemen's Protective Association, a group initially formed to improve working and living conditions for firefighters, was organized on September 11th as Local Number 1, the nation's first firefighting union. Now, I am no longer a member of Local 1, but I was for some 32 years. Interesting, Pittsburgh's union is called Local 1. And the story that I get, and I guess it's true, Chicago, the city of Chicago is Local Number 2. History says that same date, both Pittsburgh and Chicago were forming their local. So one of them had to be number 1 and one of them had to be number 2. Guess how they decided? They flipped a coin. That's what they told me. Flipped a coin, we won, and Pittsburgh became Local 1 and Chicago's Local 2. And I remember all the years, if I had any relations with them, I never let them forget it. So. Then, in 1907, we all know what Allegheny City is, right? You know? North side. When Allegheny City was annexed to Pittsburgh, its 10 engine companies, 6 hose brigades, and 5 hook and ladder companies merged with Pittsburgh's 35 engine companies, 2 chemical and ladder companies, and 11 truck companies to become the Consolidated Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire. Now let me explain. A truck company is the ladder truck company, just nothing but ladders on it. Our engines are the fire trucks you see more of with water and hose on it. Now we do have a combination of those two. One of them's here in Squirrel Hill. It's at 18. It's called a quint. And quint meaning five functions. It has a pump, it has a water tank, it has hose, it has ground ladders, and it has an aerial ladder. So due to a reorganization that happened in 1992, the aerial ladder truck was taken out of commission there, and so was the engine, and both were replaced by this sort of multi-purpose vehicle called a quint. But interesting about Allegheny City and the north side is that there's a strong rivalry there. Is anybody from the north side, or know anybody from the north side? The north siders have a saying. It's you're either from the north side or the outside. That's what they say. They don't think the rest of us are part of the, they think they're in their own city yet. We have a lot of fun with that.
As a senator, I'm inclined to sympathize.
So anyway, but with actually that timeline I read to you was an article that the Tribune Review did on the tradition of the fire service in Pittsburgh, and it was back in March of last year. And it goes on to list the 99 firefighters that we have had that died in the line of duty. Now, I know probably the last 12 maybe that died, and I was on the job then. But it's always a sad time. It's part of what we do. But we are committed these days to try to reduce that, to reduce the number of line of death duties, the injuries the firefighters sustain, and we work toward that every day as much as we can. Let me go by decades. That took us up to 1901, I believe. 1907. So the decade between 1910 and 1920, as we move along into modern times, my research showed that the paid fire department successfully continued to protect the citizens of Pittsburgh through the years. The PBF, or Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire, began to see the introduction of motorized fire equipment in the early 1900s. These fire engines had to be connected to permanently installed boilers in the fire stations, so there would be an immediate head of steam built up if they had to respond to a fire and pump water. The pump was driven by steam pressure, and it was crucial to always maintain the pressure. Intake and return pipes from the basement boiler were connected to the rear of the engine. Now, the Squirrel Hill station, the station on Leamington, I want to say the station, there's an old fire station on Perrysville Avenue going out the north side near Perry High School. They still have the areas where these steam pipes were. So we still have some really old fire stations. And the doors are so small, I'm having trouble getting the new modern fire trucks inside them, believe me. But that's pretty neat. So between 1920 and 1930, by February of 1921, 75% of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire was motorized. The new apparatus was mostly used to great advantage in making long runs. General consensus at the time was that the motorized apparatus would have difficulty replacing the horses in areas where runs were short because the maintenance of the horses was less. So I often think about that. Change is difficult for all of us. My firefighters, they don't want to change for anything. So I can just imagine back in the day when the old timers were sitting around, drinking their coffee and saying, they want to give us a motor. They want to give us a motor on a fire truck. What are we going to do with the horses? What are we going to do with the horses? And the fire stations were built on the hills so that the horses could go downhill. It's an easy pull for them to get to the fire. They could take their time getting back, I guess. But I often think about that. When we specify or write specifications for new fire trucks, if I change something that they're not used to, oh man, you think I asked for their paycheck, But I just imagine these old timers back then. What do you mean we're not going to have any horses? Now think about the Stooges. I'm a big Three Stooges. Yeah. And
False alarms.
Yeah, false alarms. That's the best one. And they still have the horses. And, it's fun. But anyway, I don't want to get off on that. But of course, history has proven this incorrect. Obviously, that maintenance of the horses was less. As time moved on, improvements were made to motorized fire apparatus. The 1920s saw another great improvement to Pittsburgh public safety. On December 15, 1923, the city of Pittsburgh put into operation the most complete and modern fire and police alarm system in the country. This system enabled people on the street to summon firefighters or police officers through the street call boxes mounted on poles. I'm sure the vast majority of the folks in this room remember that. The fire boxes were still there when I started. So I was taught to respond to the box. Some of them, well, all of them, we had to rewind. We had a special key. We had to open the door because some of them were activated by weights that sent electrical signals through the AT&T lines. They would go to the central station and ring the bells, and the bells still rang in the fire station. So I remember that. From 1930 to 1940, in August of 1932, the National Fire Protection Association credited Pittsburgh with having the lowest fire losses from 1928 to 1931 among the cities with populations over 500,000. So back then, we had a pretty large city, 500,000. You know, we had that up until the late 60s, even more, 600,000. So the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, is still a group that is going very strong, and they write standards that we follow. We follow many of them here in Pittsburgh. It was pointed out that the Pittsburgh firefighters were the big factor in setting the remarkable record over the 4-year period. The 1934 budget of the city of Pittsburgh requested that the actual work time of the firefighter be reduced by approximately 1/7 of the time worked by them. This gave the firefighters 1 day off, called a pass day, each week. So I guess before that, they didn't have any time off. Maybe that's why Figley's wife had to come to the fire station to visit him, because they didn't have any time off. Also in this decade, the city of Pittsburgh was crippled by the Great Flood of 1936. St. Patrick's Day marked the disaster that year, causing several disastrous fires to erupt. The firefighters of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire were up to the task and managed to suppress these fires and deal with floodwaters. 1940 to 1950, on obviously December 7, 1941, the United States of America became involved in the Second World War. This occurrence gave rise to the need for the Pittsburgh firefighters to leave their jobs and family to serve in the military. Now, when I started, I heard some of the stories about the guys that left and went to the service, especially to the Second World War. The city of Pittsburgh had to rapidly fill vacancies created by firefighters who departed for the war. A job title of sub was created to work in place of any firefighter serving in the armed forces. If a sub was drafted into active duty, there were subs ready to step in. Interesting. When I started in East Liberty, I didn't know what the heck a sub was. And the old timers then used to tell me about the subs, especially if it was a guy I didn't like. You know, they say, that's so-and-so, he was a sub, he was a point, and then, he came on later after the war was over. But they actually were still talking about this when I started in the early 70s. When the respective firefighter was honorably discharged after the war was over, and he was reinstated to his former position, and he was reinstated to his former position without any loss of seniority with the Bureau. The systems of subs and sub-subs became chaotic and created hardships as the regular firefighters returned from war. So these guys wanted their jobs back, but the city had hired these subs and sub-subs. Said, no, we're the firefighters now. And like I said, I heard these stories. Politics and favoritism played significant roles who stayed and who didn't. December 16, 1942 marked the line of duty death for one firefighter. A difficult basement fire broke out in the famous William Penn Hotel in downtown. The life was lost while battling this blaze. In 1947, the famous steamship, the Island Queen, exploded and burned at the Monongahela Wharf, killing 19 people. This decade proved to be trying for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire. 1950 to 1960, one of the largest snowfalls struck the city of Pittsburgh the day after Thanksgiving in 1950. Okay. Firefighters were ordered to report to their respective firehouses for duty. Many walked great distances from their homes to the firehouse where they were assigned. All of these firefighters remained on duty for 8 days, sometimes carrying the hoses to the fire because they couldn't drive through the snow. 1952 marked the year of integration for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire. It commenced with the transferring of black firefighters, Albert Smith and William Strange, to Engine Company 28. Now, as I said earlier, Engine Company 28 was in Shadyside, in Elmer and Filbert. The building is still there, it's no longer a fire station.
Walked past it a few weeks ago.
Did you?
I never knew it was there.
Yeah, and as I say, we moved out of there in, I want to say 76 or 78, and the Bureau of EMS began in 75, and that's their headquarters.
Right.
I mentioned two names, Albert Smith and William Strange. I had the opportunity to work with William Strange. He, when I was promoted to lieutenant, Bill Strange was a captain, and I worked under his command on Leamington Avenue. And you know, he never ever mentioned anything about his early days as a struggle as a black man on the fire department with all white males. But it was so intriguing to me to read the history about him, and he never mentioned it. He never mentioned it. And Bill died a while back, I don't know how long ago. But when I was promoted to fire lieutenant, he was now Captain Strange, and in charge of the fire station. That's the first fire station I was assigned as an officer. Captain Strange was a true mentor to me. He gave me advice, really, that I still use today. Captain Strange created a place for me at the fire station in 1978. It was a small community, and I shared it with the entire crew. So as I researched the history, and I was still writing papers in this class, that thought of place became more apparent to me, and even more so after I learned about Captain Strange, for some of the things that he never told me, but I read about him later on, that he was quite historic in his career on the fire department. Captain Strange, he was a strict disciplinarian, and it was true. He didn't tolerate anything less than the best. For this, he was disliked, and he was. Not many guys liked to work for him. But he knew that he had to do his job correctly and serve the citizens. He must insist on nothing but the best from everyone. And that is part of the training that I still subscribe to today from him. And that's the way we still run this bureau. That we know we serve the citizens of this city, and we will not settle for anything less than the best service we can deliver to you. And I think about Captain Strange's disciplinary style often. I somehow feel some discipline has been lost among workers today, and I think that would upset people like Captain Strange. But we're doing our best. 1960 to 1970, the rank of lieutenant was reintroduced after an absence of almost 40 years. A large ceremony was held on January 16, 1966, for 90 firefighters promoted to the rank of lieutenant. How exciting that would be. Lieutenants were assigned to the ladder trucks and captains were assigned to the engines. We still have these officer positions today. When I started in 1973, I heard stories from the old timers about that promotion day. It was a big deal. It was a very big deal. That promotion was the largest in Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire history and remains as such today. I can't say that I have experienced a promotion of such large numbers since then. Formal education for us as firefighters became a reality in 1967. The local community college of Allegheny County, began offering classes to earn an associate's degree in fire science and administration, of which I took advantage of, graduating with mine in 1974. Many firefighters took advantage of this opportunity, although it was slow to catch on. Formal post-high school education was not the norm for firefighters as it is today. We certainly encourage education and learning and training as much as we can. And I'm happy to tell you that the vast majority of our guys are really interested in learning today. And owing to the wonders of technology, as I wrote this paper, I said I was completing my bachelor's degree through distance learning through Empire State College in New York. And that's how I completed both of them. my undergraduate and graduate degree was online. So that's why it's a real advantage to firefighters today, because we have a computer at every fire station. So the firefighters work a 24-hour schedule. They have a lot of time that they can spend to their studies if they want to be involved with that. The fire prevention and investigative units were quite busy toward the end of the 1960s with bomb scares. Well, we all remember the 60s, and especially the late 60s, along with rioting, looting, and maliciously set fires. It was a tumultuous time in our society, and Pittsburgh wasn't immune. Again, the firefighters stepped up to the task of protecting the citizens of Pittsburgh. From 1970 then up to 2006, these years saw radical changes to the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire. Modern fire trucks were purchased in the early 1970s, upgrading the fleet. I'll show you a picture from this centennial book of the station in East Liberty where I started. We didn't have roofs on the fire trucks. Some of you probably remember that. We didn't have a roof. We used to have a tillerman at the back of the ladder that drove. I did that. No roof over your head. But now today, everything's enclosed for safety. And about this time, Pittsburgh started to see a decline in our population. So, with that decline of population, we began to close fire stations in the city of Pittsburgh. And again, having been hired in 1973, I have lived through all of these reductions since then, up until we actually had our latest closing due to economic times was in 2005. 1974 saw the closing of 3 fire stations and the elimination of chief's drivers. So that our battalion chiefs and our deputy chiefs used to have a driver. They were eliminated in 74 to try to save money. In 1974, we had a work hour reduction from 46 hours a week to 42 hours a week, which we still work today, 42 hours a week. Okay, what else? This would be much interest, except that everything has changed since September 11th, obviously. And we are so much more aware of homeland security, terrorist acts, and those kinds of things. See, I told you I could keep on talking. But I just wanted to, I think these pictures are kind of neat. I just want to show you, and I can pass this around. This is a picture, and I'll pass it around, of engine company number 5. That was at Center and Kirkpatrick in the Hill District. Now, I'll give you, this was an email that one of my firefighters got from someone looking for a history of a firefighter, a captain named Francis Hutchinson. And he worked at Engine Company 5. And I'm wondering, and there's a list of guys, and I'm wondering if he's in that picture. I don't have the identities of those guys, but there's a picture of Engine Company 5 as it was, you know, around 1970. So it's the same, if you look at that picture, the same medallion is above the door on that picture. It's still there. I looked at it really close. So you can see the age of that fire truck and the age of these fire trucks. Now we still had those kinds of fire trucks when I started. Those are C-grade. You talk about C-grade, those are C-grade fire trucks. Now this picture, I'll pass it around. It's a lineup of fire trucks that it looks like we bought a fleet of, and I don't know the year, but they're Diamond Rio fire trucks. Now the two on the left, one was a light unit. It was just a fire truck that had huge lights, and it was powered by a generator, and it, you know, it responded, and at night it lit up the scene for us. The next one was the same kind of fire truck, but it had long brass nozzles on it. That was called a deluge truck, or a deluge truck. There's a picture of it there. That's in East Liberty. Now if you look at the second one in there, that's that picture. It looks like when they bought those, it took them somewhere up, maybe Shenley Park or something overlooking Oakland, and took this
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
cathedral.
University of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, in the background.
Cathedrals there.
Cathedral's in the back, right.
This is something more probably in the early 40s.
Exactly. That fire truck was still there in 1973 when I started, because I used to take it for a ride. We didn't use it much anymore. And I used to ask the captain to let me take it out for a ride. Now that picture, a year and a half ago, a guy stopped in the fire administration and he said, "Hey, I just brought this picture down to see if you might want it." And I said, "Oh, thank you. Where'd you get it?" He said, "You're never going to believe it." He said, "I bought a used car off somebody, and when I took it home," he said, I started to go through the car and the trunk. He opened the trunk, there were some old magazines in there. He was just flipping through the magazines, that picture fell out." Can you imagine? So he said he didn't want it, and he brought it down to us. So I really kind of enjoy that. But I'll just pass that around. I'm going to glance through it. And again, I have a CD of the history, and I actually have copies of. Maybe you can help. Yeah, maybe you can help me pass these out. I got another stuff. That's the first paper I wrote on history of Pittsburgh, and then this is the second paper I wrote on the history of the fire department. And I made copies for everybody, and I'll leave the extras.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The only thing I need back is my original. I left some of my cards here if anybody wants to pick one up. Let me see if there's anything else before I. On that CD is a picture. This is a picture of a fire engine. It was actually a replica of one we had here in Pittsburgh. It's called an Amos-K, A-M-O-S-K-E-A-G fire engine, and pictures of this are on that CD. So that was the kind of steamer that we had here in Pittsburgh. Back, I guess you passed the picture.
I got it.
For the fire truck.
You passed the picture.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, we got this. We have time for a few
A
questions.
few questions, I'm sorry, I can ramble here.
I was wondering how the change was made and when horses could enter, but you answered that question eventually. But what did you do with the horses, and what did you do with the wagons?
I
What
have no
happened to
idea.
all of those things?
I don't know.
And then, who made the decision what kind of engine or fire truck?
Well, that might not have been such a difficult decision, because back then, and even in the 70s, when I started, there were only a few companies that made fire engines. American LaFrance was one, and Seagrave was the other. Seagrave is still in business. I travel there because we're still buying Seagrave fire trucks. American LaFrance is in business, but they're not doing very well. So my guess is that whoever was in charge of the fire trucks back then, they just bought one of those two, you know. Today, there are many, many different makes of fire trucks, but I don't know who made the decision. I don't know what happened to those old, it's too bad we don't have a museum that we could find them.
And when people I don't know how you people are trained when you first start. What kind of class do you have, for instance?
My class, when I started in the 50s, they didn't have a training academy. The firefighters got hired and they went right to the fire station. They didn't know anything about anything. In the late 50s, the Fire Training Academy opened on Washington Boulevard. You know where that is in the Navy Run.
Yeah.
Well, that was the beginning of formal training for firefighters. They went there and they learned how to use hose and ladders and squirt the water and drive the fire truck. I went through only 6 weeks of training in 1973. Today, we put our firefighters through 18 weeks of training. I mean, it's just so much more expensive. They have medical training, they have, well, we have so much, the breathing apparatus and everything. But when I came out, I knew the basics. I knew the different connections and appliances and nozzles and different sizes of hose, how to drive the fire truck. They were all standard shift back then. Today, they're all automatic. I don't think anybody today could drive a standard shift fire truck. At least the people that we hire today, because they're young kids. But you had to know how to drive a standard shift when I started. You had to have a high school diploma, and you had to know how to drive a standard shift fire truck, or transmission. That was a requirement, so.
On TV, you see them talk about probationary guys. Is that still?
Yes, our guys have 6 months probation. And what that means is they serve this term, just this time frame, just like anybody that would be on probation. And we watch them, that's the period of time we can weed them out before they become, they can become a member of the union then, and they have more rights of protection. But during that probation period of time, we scrutinize them, and if they need more training, we send them back to the training academy. Their company officers actually assess the progress they make. But with 18 weeks of training, we don't have too much trouble with the probationary period. They're all pretty good when they come on. Yeah, we train them to the state of Pennsylvania actually mandates our training now. So we have to follow what the state curriculum is.
When did the state take over?
Probably in the 80s.
Oh.
The state developed curriculum for different levels of firefighter. Firefighter 1, firefighter 2, and that's what we certify our firefighters to. So they have they're EMTs when they come out of training school, so they're very well trained. We invest a lot of time and money in them.
Do you lose a lot of people in training? Do they drop out?
Not many, a few. We just graduated a class December 29th. We graduated a class of firefighters. I think we lost one out of that, and the second week of training, it was a gentleman who just decided this wasn't for him. And actually, that was a good time for him to leave because we were able to get someone else off the list. So we didn't lose, because, we had 24, we wanted 24 to graduate. With him, it was only 23 with him leaving, so we were able to grab somebody else. If we were halfway through, we probably couldn't do that. It's too much to make up. But 2 weeks wasn't a problem. We typically don't lose many. No.
Do you have to have so many? Follow up on her. Maybe you seem to say like you had to have 24 to graduate this time.
Depends on how many vacancies we have
Oh.
and retirements. In 2005, we retired, we lost over 230 firefighters to retirement. And that was because there was a change in their pension benefits.
Yeah.
We have hired back since 2000, the end of 2005, maybe about 200 of them. But so we still have vacancies. We'll be hiring another class probably in 09. Yes, we try to keep the vacancies filled so that we have full complement of firefighters. We have safety manning here, which means we have to have 4 firefighters on the fire truck all the time. So we work in pairs.
And you let the schools know what's available?
We do. Unfortunately, Peabody was called the Public Safety Academy. And what that was is there was curriculum there for any student who was interested in being a police officer, a paramedic, or a firefighter. They could go to Peabody. It was like a magnet type school, and start to learn about maybe getting into that profession. The school board cut that program about a year or 2 ago. Yeah, they said there wasn't enough interest. We lost it. Now what we do now is we're just going to start this. It's called a risk watch program. We have to formally meet with the Board of Education yet, but we are going to give a curriculum of safety education to the school teachers. And 1 hour a month, they will have to teach fire safety and rescue techniques to the students, just like they do math and reading and education. So we're trying to get the message out early to the children.
I was going to ask you, why is it that in so many areas of the country, not so much in Pittsburgh, but the ones I've noticed in other things, that they have the EMS people tied in with the fire department, not to tie in, but that the fire department takes the EMS message. Should they have their own line? Why do they do that in so many other parts of the country?
Because we're stubborn.
And unthankful.
Yeah, well,
They were the first
Well,
response for
I'll give you the
life.
history of that in a nutshell. In 1973, when I started, there was no EMS bureau. The police transported people to the hospital. And how they did it was, the police wagon had an army stretcher in it. And when someone needed to go to the hospital, they went to the scene of the accident or whatever. They put the person on a stretcher and they strapped them in. They put them in the back of the wagon. This is true. Off they went. I watched them do that. And I often thought, and no attendant in the back. They, get to the hospital. That was it. In 1975, EMS, the Bureau of EMS was started. Now, in 1974, it was made known to us, firefighters, it was made known to the police, hey, this EMS stuff is coming. We should get it on the fire department. We should get it on the police department. The police said, oh, wait, we don't want to do that. We're police officers. And what did we say? We don't want to do that. We're firefighters. We squirt water. We don't treat sick people. Now, that was sort of the culture all over Pennsylvania, because when I travel the country, people were asking me, say, you guys in Pennsylvania never got it, did you? So what happened was, EMS started here in Pittsburgh as a third service. That's why you see the ambulances. And then along in 1985, they said, you know what, we want the firefighters to be involved with EMS. The administration, Mayor Carroll jury then, I can't remember.
Yeah, 85.
Yeah, 85. And so firefighters began to do first responder work. There's certain criteria where we were called for, priority calls. No breathing, no pulse, severe bleeding, shock, stroke, those kinds of things. That's when the firefighters go along with EMS. So right now, every company, every station, fire station in Pittsburgh are first responders, medical. So if you dial 911 and you give the call taker your complaint, 99 times out of 100, the firefighters are going to come first. And what you're speaking of was really modeled out in California. And you remember the show Squad 51? What was it called? Emergency. Emergency was Johnny Gage and Roy DeSoto. Remember? And they went ahead in the rescue truck, and the fire truck came along, and then it was an ambulance, but that was a private company. There are cities today that still do that. And if you read in the news back with Mayor Murphy and some of the other administrations, there was talk about selling the Bureau of EMS to a private company, but that's never materialized. But that was the model of it, and it went across the country. But we were too stubborn. We didn't want it. We said, well, what are you talking about? We don't carry stretchers. I can still hear the chief. God rest his soul. Tom Kennelly was our chief back when I started. He said, we're firemen, but we missed the boat. So, but we are doing first responder work, and very well. We have defibrillators on the fire trucks now. We don't administer any medications or drugs, but we're under the same protocols as the EMS, under the same medical director, Dr. Roth. We're very involved with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. So we set, actually the firefighters, the 30 to, if you take a CPR class, you'll find that the compressions to breathing ratio was established here in Pittsburgh for the nation by the firefighters because of the excellent CPR we do. So we're well into the medical portion of our service. But back in the 70s, guys didn't want any part of it.
Well, where do you get that training?
At our fire training academy. We have our own instructors. We have a great training staff. Yeah, down on Washington Boulevard, we have a curriculum that we follow, and we have our own firefighters. We have some of our firefighters are actually paramedics. I'm an EMT. We have a lot of them are EMTs, and some of them are instructors. So we teach our own firefighters. So
You guys do our medical too.
we do. That's 90% of our work. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Wow.
Very good. Thank you. This is our little book. Don't forget, 2009, our new membership information is back there. We appreciate all the contributions and membership we've had over the years. So if you want to re-sign up as a member, please feel free.